These wet weather and weather fronts are still around, and so some cloud there across central parts as well as the far northwest. But otherwise, Friday's looking like a fine day, plenty of sunshine, even more sunshine to come on Saturday and Sunday.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, it's 4 o'clock. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Coming up for you in the next 60 minutes. A record number of small boats for this year came across the English Channel yesterday. Are people smugglers trying to take advantage of the refugee crisis in Ukraine to move economic migrants into Britain? Also, the man who would be king. I'm joined this hour by Tom Tugendhat, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and the only leading Conservative politician who answers the question, would you like to be Prime Minister, with a simple answer, yes. And your favourite GP and mine, Dr. Veena Babu, joins me to explain why family doctors are in danger of becoming a thing of the past. Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, the former MEP, Belinda de Lucy. But first, we have the headlines for you.
Good afternoon, it's 4:01. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. British Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has landed in Oman after leaving Iran. Labour MP Tulip Siddiq posted a picture on Twitter of Mr Zaghari-Ratcliffe on the plane. Fellow British Iranian Anousheh Ashuri was also released. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe had been held in Iran for 6 years on charges of spying, allegations she strongly denies. Nazanin's husband and daughter say they're delighted.
Huge relief that she's on a plane, that she's coming home, that she's free. And thank you to everyone who's been helping along the way. It's been a long journey that people have been keeping us following it on the news, on petitions, with the government. I've said some rough things over the years, but in the end, she's coming home.
Well, following the news, the Foreign Secretary has confirmed that the UK has settled an outstanding £400 million debt with Tehran. Speaking to the Commons, Liz Truss said both former detainees will be coming back to Britain.
They are on their way home. They will land in the UK later today and they will be reunited with their families. Morad Tabaz has also been released from prison on furlough. I know that the whole House and the whole country will rejoice at this news and will share in relief that their horrendous ordeal is over.
The Foreign Secretary. While speaking in the Commons earlier, Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner urged the Deputy Prime Minister to make sure this situation is never repeated.
So will the Minister commit to a review of these cases to understand what more could have been done by the British Government to secure releases and whether the lazy comments of the Prime Minister worsened the situation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I can tell the Honourable Lady, having worked for 2 years with the concerted diplomatic effort led by the Prime Minister, that we have done absolutely everything that we can. She shouldn't give succour to the despotic regime that detained our nationals in Iran or around the world by suggesting it's anyone else's responsibility other than theirs.
Dominic Raab there. Ukraine's president has delivered an historic address to the US Congress. Speaking via a video link, Volodymyr Zelenskyy called for further military support and assistance following Russia's invasion. He also urged the United States to impose further sanctions against Russia.
Russia has turned the Ukrainian sky into a source of death. And it would be fair if it ended in a day, in 24 hours. That evil would be punished immediately.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson says there's no way Ukraine will join NATO anytime soon. It comes as President Zelenskyy said that NATO has no intention of accepting his country. The UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace met his NATO counterparts today to discuss Russia's invasion. During a visit to Abu Dhabi, as part of efforts to wean the UK off Russian oil and gas, Boris Johnson said the UK will continue to support Ukraine.
The decision about the future of Ukraine has got to be for the Ukrainian people and for Volodymyr Zelenskyy as their elected leader. And the most important thing is that Putin's aggression, his absolutely barbaric attacks on Ukraine, should stop, and they should not be seen to have succeeded.
Boris Johnson speaking in the UAE. The journalist who protested on Russian state television against the invasion of Ukraine says she's extremely concerned for her safety. Marina Ovsyannikova ran onto the set of the network's live news show last week, holding a sign reading, "Don't believe propaganda, they're lying to you." She says she has no plans to flee Russia and hopes she won't face criminal charges. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier.
It is 4:05. Very good afternoon to you. Remember 9/11. So said the Ukrainian president today when he spoke to the US Congress. Volodymyr Zelenskyy likened the Russian invasion of his country also to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And he argued that it wasn't too late for a NATO-led no-fly zone. Few people have written more about the significance of 9/11 than the author and GB News presenter Mark Steyn, who's broadcasting from Ukraine today, right now. Mark joins me. Mark, welcome to you, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me. What have you seen in Ukraine? How does being there inform your understanding of this story?
Well, I think almost everyone who wants to leave has left, and that means that the people who are here are determined to fight for Ukraine, and they mean that seriously as you can. I'm incredibly moved by, stories of middle-aged women that I've met who are determined to stay here to the end, even if it means a shootout with Russian troops who are somewhere to the north, little to the north of where I am right now. And I think whatever you feel about this situation, the rights and wrongs, how it happened, Putin's invasion, the generally bad US meddling of the last 15 to 20 years, the people on the ground here love their country and they're willing to fight for their country in every way possible.
And whether they fight on or whether they...
We had a...
Sorry, Mark, I was just going to say, whether they fight on, whether they decide to negotiate a peace treaty, that's their decision, isn't it? I mean, I know there's lots of voices off, people who would urge them to do either of those things, but at the end of the day, it's for them to decide whether they want to cut a deal with Putin or fight on.
Well, I think I had a long-time viewer and reader of mine who made what struck me as quite a smart comment, where he said the West wants Ukraine to fight its war for it, and Ukraine wants the West to fight its war for it. And then as I thought about it, I thought, well, no, one half of that isn't true. I think it's true that there are warmongering nitwits, particularly from the bipartisan war party in Washington, which was obviously humiliated in Afghanistan and wants to a kind of victory on the cheap, with Ukrainians doing all the heavy lifting. And I regard those people as completely contemptible. I think the American way of war doesn't work. It hasn't worked really for 75 years or so. And they need to go somewhere. They need to go on a big retreat somewhere in the mountains of Montana or Wyoming and rethink the whole business. Whereas on the Ukrainian end, they'd like help. They'd like weapons, they'd like a no-fly zone, but if not, screw the lot of you. That's basically Zelensky's attitude. He spoke to the Canadian House of Commons, and they listened to him very politely, and they all said what a great man he was, and they applauded, and then they didn't change their position. And he says, okay, so that's fine. It doesn't matter. Whatever we've got, and we will fight on alone.
The fact he's addressing the House of Commons in Canada, the fact he's addressing the US Congress, Mark, it all builds up this mythology around Zelenskyy. And it's not just an ego trip for him. This stuff matters in this sense that I come back to this idea, if he decides to cut a peace deal, when leaders cut peace deals, and we may be some way off from that yet, there are often people, more hawkish people in government or outside of government who say, you can't sell us down the river, don't be running up the white flag. He's become such a massive figure, Zelenskyy, that if he decides the moment is ripe for peace, he will almost certainly get his way.
Well, I'm not entirely sure about that. When I look at this 15-point peace plan that is supposedly in play right now, there are elements of that that are certainly going to be problematic for people on the ground in Ukraine. What is surprising to me, because you know where I'm sitting right now has been part of almost everything. It's been part of the Kingdom of Hungary, the Habsburg Empire. It's been part of Czechoslovakia. It's been part of the Soviet Union. And what's actually incredible to me is that in 3 decades, I think there has been undoubtedly a sense of Ukrainian nationalism that is stronger than at any point in human history. And they do not want to go back either into a Soviet prison, no matter how temptingly Putin may appear to construct it, but they don't even think that a kind of Finlandization or Austrian neutrality is anywhere they want to go. They regard themselves as part of the European family, as part of the community of nations of Europe. Now, if you're sitting in Belgium, if you're sitting in the Netherlands, if you're sitting in London or Washington, you might say, well, tough, you guys got to suck it up. Well, they don't want to suck it up. And that's kind of admirable because, to be honest, the kind of patriotic spirit you find on the ground here, I would occasionally like to see in the UK or in the US or in Canada, because it is as fierce and primal as anything I've seen in quite a while, certainly in a European country where most of them are post-national.
Mark Steyn will be live with his show from Ukraine from 8 p.m. our time tonight. Mark, thanks very much indeed for your time. Let's turn to former MEP. He was just saying something there. You can hear more from 8 o'clock. Belinda de Lucy's alongside me, former MEP, to ponder on events, not just in Ukraine, Belinda, but also, as Mark was saying, in America, in Canada as well. He bridled a little bit, I'm overstating that, bridled a little bit at my characterisation of Zelenskyy as now a really important figure in world history. But the point I'm trying to make, and I think it's indisputable, is that he's such a figure within international politics and within Ukraine. He's not cut and run. He's been this enormous charismatic leader, that will actually make it easier for him to sell, if it comes to it, the peace deal to his own people.
Absolutely. I think his story of the acting background and being plucked out of that sort of comedian Dancing with the Stars background to lead his country against this mighty power, is one of the largest military personnel in the world, and there's Ukraine with this decent chap who, when offered the chance to get a ride over to the States, said, I don't need a ride, I need weapons. I mean, he is coming out with the lines. This matters to people. He's inspiring people. He's down on the ground fighting with his people while Putin sits there on his paranoid COVID long table in a marble room, all stressed about a virus. There you have Zelenskyy mucking in with the meat of it. And I think him building himself up to be such an important part of the history of Ukraine, if he is assassinated, and I hope God nothing happens to him, he will be this martyr because he sets such an example to, especially European countries, that borders matter, loyalty to your nation matters. And I think Europe did need a wake-up call about that.
Well, if you've set this up beautifully, actually, Belinda, for now, thanks very much indeed. Borders matter, says Belinda de Lucy. 300 illegal migrants landed in Britain from France on Tuesday. The influx didn't receive much coverage, but it represents the largest daily total for illegal crossings into Britain so far in 2022. There have been no reports that any of those who arrived were necessarily Ukrainian, but as the boats all came from France, it's evident none were fleeing an active war zone. Let's turn to the director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, who is Stephen Wolfe, who joins me now. Hi to you, Steve.
Good evening.
300 migrants yesterday. It's a story that was in the headlines towards the back end of last year. For understandable reasons, it's rather fallen from view.
Absolutely. So far this year, there's been approximately 3,000 of those channel migrants arrive on the shores of Britain, mainly down towards Kent. So this story, yes, has disappeared, quite rightly, because there are more important issues happening in Ukraine. But it isn't a story that's going to go away for the rest of the year. And as we are struggling to find accommodation by the government to house those genuine refugees coming over from the Ukraine, we will still need to find accommodation this year, estimated of 60 to 70,000 coming across on the channel.
What have you made, Stephen, of this departure in government policy when it comes to the accommodation of refugees? This idea that seems pretty novel to many of us, that the state is saying, we're going to hand this... If you're really serious about helping refugees, OK, go on then. We'll pay you a little bit of money to host somebody in your house. But this is very much not a matter for the state necessarily, or even local authorities. Though obviously, to some degree, they're on the hook when it comes for things like schools and all the rest of it. But this idea that they are saying to individuals, not the state, take a hand.
The reason they're doing this, quite frankly, is because the Home Office is in such a mess. It's failed in its policy to manage the economic migrants and those who are genuine asylum seekers from other countries of the world over the past few years. And as a consequence of that, there genuinely is very little accommodation left in the private sector, either through the contracts that they've subcontracted to the three major providers for hotels and long-term accommodation, and councils, which are struggling to find the resources as well. Bearing in mind, Colin, we do have about 250,000 people born in this country living in bedsits without accommodation as well. So that failure over the past few years has led this massive hole. And that's why they are literally begging people to house those genuine asylum seekers, because now that we've got a true refugee crisis, it will shame the government to have nowhere to house them. And that is why they're trying to fund people to do their job for them.
Stephen, what do you say to those people who hear your words there and say, true refugee crisis? Who's he to draw a distinction between people who are determined to come to this country? I'm with you, by the way. There is a distinction, and I wonder why some people are loath to draw it.
I've made it very clear. Those who are fleeing Afghanistan, Iran and Iraq, there will be genuine asylum seekers. And we must offer, as we always do as a nation such as our own, the opportunity to house them. But what we have discovered over the past 4 years is that the vast majority of those people coming across the Channel are young men between 18 and 40. They are economic migrants. This evidence is backed up by the World Bank, which is now suggesting around the globe about 60% of all of those fleeing areas are economic migrants. And there's definitely a distinction that you can draw between those women and children who are now leaving the Ukraine because they have to under the bombs of Putin. So I think that is a very clear distinction. And that is not to say that we shouldn't be holding our hands out for those who are genuine asylum seekers elsewhere. I don't think any of us have ever said that. It's just that we should stop those who are abusing the system.
Stephen Wolfe, as ever, thanks for your time. Thanks a lot. Now, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman detained in Iran nearly 6 years ago, is on her way home and is expected to land in the UK after 10 p.m. tonight. Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe was arrested in 2016, accused of spying. She denies that, insisting she was in Iran to teach. It's suspected that she's been released because the UK has agreed to pay a £400 million debt to Iran. This will allow some sanctions to be lifted, allowing Iran to supply more oil to the UK and global markets as Russian oil is cut. Well, Belinda de Lucy spoke about this when she was an MEP.
Bolder in its provocations, it appears the EU's deal with Iran is failing in its objectives. British citizens are the subject of kidnapping, solitary confinement and barbarity. Our citizens have become pawns in this geopolitical game, and yet the EU remains the biggest global champion of the Iran nuclear deal. And while the EU rightly speaks about the human rights atrocities, what does speaking do? It's sanctions, not words, are needed, or Iran will be emboldened further. But the names of just some of those languishing in Iranian prison cells need to be spoken. Our citizens who live in fear and isolation right now. Real people like Jolie King and Mark Firkin. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
Belinda's alongside me. I suppose there'll be people looking at your words then who'll say, there was an opportunity, there was a forum in Brussels or Strasbourg, wherever you were, to actually make the case. There's an example of Europe working.
Yes, well, I was getting a little bit fed up of so many speeches in the EU Parliament about human rights and yet the EU's approach to Iran. Even Trump said it was a soft-touch approach. In 2019, there was a huge protest of French Iranians going through Paris. Many of the demonstrators were desperate that the EU would take a tougher stance on Iran because it was just getting away with murder. It's very, very scary who you get into bed with if they are rogue states, if they hold hostages, because you're suddenly on a leash. And I'm very concerned. I hope the UK isn't going to go down the path of relying on Iran for any oil, but it's a very good day today that Nazanin has been released. She suffered horrendously. These aren't nice prisons over in Iran. Sleep deprivation, bright lights. Her prison cells were constantly lit, so she didn't know whether it was night or day. She was told her child would be taken away from her, that her family would be killed unless she became a British spy. 6 years of this, never knowing when she was going to be released. I have so much sympathy for her, as I have with previous hostages that the UK have unfortunately had to deal with. But I think Liz Truss does get a big tick here, having negotiated with a new Iranian government some way of paying the huge debt, which we did owe, but in a way that didn't cross the sanctions line and that will help, hopefully, the humanitarian aid.
There'll be a lot of, people will celebrate rightly when she touches down today. There's a bit of a scratch at the back of my head that doesn't want to be unduly negative about this, but I'm mindful, as we, I suppose, have to be, the weight of expectations on at the end of the day, this is a story about a couple, isn't it? A married couple. And I think back to John McCarthy, one of the Beirut hostages who was held for the best part of 5 years in terrible conditions in Lebanon. And when he came back, Jill Morell, who his partner had long campaigned for his relief, well, their relationship didn't survive the reality of being plunged back together, it's going to be difficult for them.
The transition is horrific. I can't imagine what it must be like. Terry Waite, again, suffered the same 5 years, tucked away. 4 years of that Terry had in isolation, not seeing a soul and in blindfolds. But then you have the case of Paul and Rachel Chandler, a couple from Tunbridge Wells, who were kidnapped and held hostage by Somali pirates in 2009. And they were held hostage for over a year and fed raw goat's liver and, you know, again, threat of execution, things like that constantly. However, they came back and they found that they weren't too damaged because they wrote a book. Now, Terry Waite says the same things. The action of writing a book and unravelling all the horrors of your journey actually is a great healing process. So, but as a couple, what a love story, what Richard has done for his wife. I'm blown away by it. It's quite an emotional day.
Really wonderful. Belinda Fernand, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to be with Mark White, looking at the state of the British Army and whether they are likely to get more money to deal with the Russian threat. But first, a look at the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Widespread outbreaks of rain are affecting much of the UK this afternoon, but they will clear from the west and then a touch of frost under clear skies overnight as this ridge of high pressure builds in. But a couple of weather fronts are straddling the UK at the moment. The two across England and Wales are merging together to bring widespread low cloud outbreaks of rain. Eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England seeing that wet weather, heaviest in the east, but it does clear. And by midnight, most places are clear of that, with those clear skies moving in from the west. And with light winds, temperatures will fall away through the night, frost forming in many places. Temperatures in towns and cities, I think 1 to 2 degrees, but in the countryside, a couple of degrees below freezing. So chilly start to Thursday, but plenty of sunshine first thing across Scotland, England and Wales. Northern Ireland sees cloud arrive early on. That cloud and outbreaks of showery rain move into Scotland. Just about touch parts of Northern England and North Wales as well. A few showers here. The more active weather, I think, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some hail, sleet and snow showers in the far northwest later, along with a brisk breeze. A different picture, though, for the southeast. 14, 15, perhaps even 16 Celsius with widespread sunshine. Into Thursday evening, and the showers in the north tend to fade away, and overnight we'll see clear spells. Not for everyone, there will still be some areas of cloud, particularly for Wales, for western parts of England, as well as for the northwest of Scotland. But where we do see clear skies, temperatures will fall into the low single figures, and again there'll be a touch of frost around first thing Friday. But plenty of sunshine despite the early chill in the air. Some remnants of Wednesday's wet weather and weather fronts still around, and so some cloud there across central parts as well as the far northwest. But otherwise, Friday's looking like a fine day, plenty of sunshine, even more sunshine to come on Saturday and Sunday.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
27 minutes past 4. The former head of the British Army has told GB News that UK defence spending must increase by some £10 billion a year to help counter the threat from Russia. General Lord Dannatt said the Ministry of Defence should also consider buying some equipment off the shelf from countries like the United States instead of embarking on often delayed and hugely expensive domestic development programmes. Our security editor Mark White takes a look at the state of UK defence and the likelihood of any additional funding in the Chancellor's spring statement in a week's time.
Royal Marines on Arctic exercise alongside their NATO allies. These commando units and their fast attack craft symbolise the kind of rapidly deployable forces the UK Ministry of Defence sees as key to its future defence strategy. But faced with an ultra-aggressive Russia and its invasion of Ukraine, many defence experts are deeply concerned that cuts in force numbers have gone too far. With the Chancellor's spring statement a week away, he faces multiple competing demands. But defence spending has to be a key priority, according to the former head of the Army, who wants to see a £10 billion annual increase to the MOD's budget.
We've probably taken too much risk with our land warfare capability, and what we're now seeing with what the Russians are doing has exposed us to the extent that we really can't match that kind of capability, the sort of capability that the Russians are showing. So there is a very strong case to say we need to increase our defence budget by about £10 billion a year.
In 1990, at the end of the Cold War, the strength of the British Army was 150,000 personnel and 1,200 main battle tanks. Continued reductions in strength over the years left the Army with 82,500 soldiers last year and 227 battle tanks. The latest defence review means a further 10,000 cuts in Army numbers over the next few years, with the battle tank strength dropping to just 148.
For the strategic planners who thought that tank warfare had had its day, they only need look at Ukraine and the massive armour being deployed by Russia. But that conflict has also shown how small, sophisticated missile systems are proving highly effective.
Like Lord Dannatt, the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee wants an immediate increase in funding of at least 20% and a reversal of plans to cut the number of land forces and tanks.
We've got rid of the Warrior fighting vehicle. This is a lighter tank with a big armament on the top of it. I used it in places like Bosnia. Very, very effective indeed. Brilliant for dismounted infantry as well. Now we're getting rid of all those, replacing that vehicle, this tracked vehicle, with a wheeled vehicle which doesn't have a big gun on the top. Now that would mean that we'd be very vulnerable on the battlefield itself.
In a statement, the Ministry of Defence told us to tackle the growing threats we face, we launched the Army's Radical Future Soldier reforms at the end of last year, which will make the service more agile, lethal and expeditionary. The Ministry of Defence has faced repeated criticism over the years for badly managed and over-ambitious equipment programmes, which have often seen their costs spiralling out of control. Lord Dannatt believes it may be time to look at buying some equipment off the shelf.
It's very good for British industry to design our own equipment, but perhaps sometimes, if there is an urgency about it, we ought to look to see what is there, probably on the American market, and consider holding our nose, if we like, and buying foreign as opposed to building it ourselves.
Okay, fire!
The UK has already doubled its military presence to bolster defences of some of its Eastern European allies, with many NATO countries, including Germany, looking to massively increase their defence spending in the face of a possible new Cold War. The pressure on the British government to follow suit is immense. Mark White, GB News.
Well, Belinda DeLucy's alongside me, formerly an MEP, and I'm sure as an MEP, thought about defence spending. Are we spending enough?
I think 2% is a good amount during peacetime, but Europe is not peaceful at the moment. We need to increase it toot sweet, and I think there's this saying, obviously, that a sign in reduction of military and reduction defence spending is a dividend of peace, and it's actually a good thing. Well, there isn't peace now, so we need to increase it. But I do appreciate that there needs to be a shift in our response to attacks. Cyber warfare, for example, is a big threat at the moment. Banks in England are worried that Russia is going to retaliate. We got them out of SWIFT, what they're going to do, cyber attack our banks possibly. These are all big, big questions. So I do think an increase, definitely, but only in times of war.
Linda, for now, thanks very much indeed. After the break, I'm going to be joined by the chairman of the Defence Select Committee and the Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat to discuss latest steps the government's taking to help Ukraine. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines from Ray.
It's 33 minutes past 4. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe says she wants her husband to make her a cup of tea when she gets back to Britain later on today. The British-Iranian aid worker has landed in Oman after being held in Iran for 6 years. Fellow British-Iranian Anousheh Ashuri was also released. Nazanin's husband and daughter say they're delighted that she's finally coming home. The Prime Minister says there's no way Ukraine will join NATO anytime soon. It comes as President Zelenskyy said he believes NATO has no intention of accepting his country. During a visit to Abu Dhabi, as part of efforts to wean the UK off Russian oil and gas, Boris Johnson said the UK will continue to support Ukraine. Ukraine's president has delivered a historic address to the US Congress. Speaking via a video link, Volodymyr Zelenskyy called for further military support and assistance following Russia's invasion. He also urged the US to impose further sanctions against Russia. And the RSPCA has issued a statement saying it has started the process of bringing a prosecution against West Ham defender Kurt Zouma and his brother Johan under the Animal Welfare Act. It's after footage emerged of the player slapping and kicking his pet cat. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Brazier.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It is coming up to 22 minutes to 5. Well, as our security editor, Mark White, was explaining just before the break there is a growing chorus of influential voices who favour a sharp increase in British defence spending. Last week, for instance, Admiral Lord West said the UK should be spending at least 3% of GDP on its armed forces. The former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, suggested it ought to be more like 4%. Surely, at the very least, there's a strong case now for putting a stop to those planned cuts to the size of our army and indeed things like the number of tanks that we currently have. Well, joining me now is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and indeed former soldier, Tom Tugendhat. Tom Tugendhat, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get into defence spending, can we just address what's been happening to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe? Wonderful news that she's been released. How much money do you think we've had to pay and where will that money go?
Well, we've been told that it's nearly $400 million and it's going on aid. It can only be used for aid purposes. Let's make sure that it remains the case. Sadly, we know that when the US handed over a similar sum, a bit more actually, for the release of other hostages who were kidnapped for ransom by the Iranian state a number of years ago, that money sadly was to a large extent used to murder hundreds of thousands of Syrians in the Syrian civil war. So, we need to make sure that that money doesn't go to those purposes and that is indeed kept to humanitarian purposes.
It's a function, I suppose, of the times that we live in, and I'm not suggesting that the deal that's been cut with the Iranians has anything to do with maybe accessing their supplies and reserves of oil in the future, but it's certainly the case that the Prime Minister, who's in Saudi Arabia, has gone there basically to implore them to release more gas and oil onto the market. Sometimes when you've got a situation like the one we face at present, you have to enter into some fairly Faustian pacts with some unpleasant regimes.
Well, Colin, I've never been shy about saying it, and I know that you and I have spoken about it. My policy has always been to look after the interests of the people of our country and our islands first. I'm afraid that is literally the job of a British politician, is to serve our interests first. Now, that means making sure that we're able to protect our economy, protect our interests, look after the British people. But it also means that we've got to be careful about the deals we do today because they have implications tomorrow. And so when we're looking at these deals, we need to make sure we're doing deals that we can live with and that don't undermine our future security. A classic example of that, of course, is Germany's deal, sadly, dependency on Russian gas. It seemed like a sensible idea at the time because it was cheap energy. It doesn't seem quite so clever now.
Could you imagine, just a month ago, having a situation where you mentioned Germany, where they would announce, almost turning on a dime, rearmament on a massive scale, $100 billion of defence investment by a country which hitherto, for obvious historical reasons, was incredibly reluctant to increase the size of its military. What a transformation.
When Chancellor Scholz announced it to the Bundestag, when was it? Crikey, it feels like months ago. Actually, it was only about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was a complete surprise, not just to many members of the Bundestag, but many members of his own government, because he hadn't spoken to them about it because he was concerned about the reaction. Now, actually, this is really an example in Germany of green politics, not of SPD politics, because the German Greens have always been very active on human rights and on defence. It's a legacy policies that led them into Bosnia in the 1990s. So it's a continuation for them of a tradition. But you're absolutely right. It's a really big transformation. I don't think it's been fully understood in the UK what a radical shift this is. Now, I was talking to the Latvian defence minister only a few days ago. They're going from about 1.2, 1.3% on defence 2 years ago, all the way up to 3% in coming days. And just in case you're wondering what others are doing, Estonia is about to buy, or rather has put in the order for, 60 F-35 jets. And just to put that in context, we have 48.
Wow. Well, that brings us on to our defence spending then. I talked to Admiral Lord West a fortnight ago, 3%. He said 3% of GDP is the figure, the aspiration that we ought to be looking at. Jeremy Hunt, people remember him as a former health secretary, but actually, of course, he was a former foreign secretary as well, talked about, he didn't name 4%, but he said we ought to be up to American levels of spending, in other words, 4% plus. What's a reasonable figure?
Well, look, this is something I addressed actually for the first time in a speech in 2017, because I've long been calling for the reality that we don't spend enough on influencing ourselves abroad. And while I have great admiration for Lord West, not everything we need to spend money on is steel. Actually, defence today comes in many different ways. We always talk about cyber, and cyber is, of course, enormously important. So spending on the agencies, spending on GCHQ, on the Secret Intelligence Service and the British Security Service are very important. But here's the thing. So is spending on justice reform, so is spending on real diplomacy with weight. So is spending on trade policy, because building up trading partnerships that are able to resist the pressures of foreign governments who have, how can I put this politely, other interests and not just economic partnership, is an essential part of our defence. Now, none of this negates the fact that, frankly, an army of 72,000 is far too small. When I was helping on the Army strategy team, we fought a very strong rearguard action when the army was going to be cut from 100,000 to about 80,000. We managed to get it to 96,000 instead. I won't tell you the ways in which we achieved it, but that was one of the things we fought. And I'd like to see the army going back up in numbers because, you know, as Stalin put it, quantity has a quality all of its own. And we do need more ships, we do need more soldiers, and we need more aircraft. We do need to make sure that when we turn up in numbers and that we're able to match not just in skill, but actually, sadly, too often in size as well.
As you say, foreign policy isn't just all about the threat of bombs and bullets. There are different forms of persuasion, and sometimes it takes the form of blandishments. Nonetheless, there are people, and over the last week or two, who've looked, for instance, to take one country. If you look at the situation in Pakistan, Imran Khan, their prime minister, a formerly test-playing cricketer who's turned out to be something of a Putin, well, I was going to call him a Putin crony. That's not fair. He's making a deal with Russia for wheat and other resources, which he thinks are very much in his national interest. But by cozying up to Russia, he reminds people who are resentful of the fact we pay £250 million in aid, foreign aid to Pakistan, that maybe it's not necessarily money well spent.
Well, you know, there are many people who look around the world at our aid spending and quite rightly are critical about elements of it. We need to keep it constantly under review. But let's not forget what we're spending aid money for. Of course, we're spending it to help education programs in Pakistan or, irrigation programs in other parts of the world or whatever it happens to be. And sometimes emergency aid in response to a hurricane or a famine or whatever it is. We're also spending aid money to make sure that we have access and influence in countries around the world. And I would argue very strongly that it is our fundamental national interest and the interest of the British people to make sure that our High Commissioner in Islamabad gets the opening and the reception that he needs. It's also, just by the way, in our national interest to make sure that Pakistan succeeds as a country. You know, we have huge direct and personal connections between our country and Pakistan and India and Nigeria and many other countries. And so the idea that we can sort of cut them off or hope that it doesn't matter what happens there, I'm afraid it's just not true. And we need to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it were. And so making sure that we have that influence is essential. I'm just going to pick up on a point, if I may, though, Colin, on a point that you were talking about wheat, because this is something that we've really missed so far in the Ukraine story. And I know you were touching on it just now, so I'm going to welcome your point. You know, Ukraine grows about 12% of the world's wheat. Russia grows a further significant percentage, 5 to 7%, depending on how you count. large numbers of countries like Lebanon and Syria get 100% of their wheat from Ukraine. Many others get nearly 100% of their wheat from countries like Russia. This war and these sanctions mean that not only is the crop not going in the ground, or might not go in the ground in the coming weeks, because although the ground is currently frozen, it's hard to know where the tractors are going to come from to plough the soil, because tanks are currently driving over it. Now, if we knock out 10, 12% of the world's wheat crop, corn crop, and indeed fertilizer, we are going to see very, very serious food price rises around the world, not just in the UK, where we're already seeing some inflationary pressure, but in countries like Egypt, where the last time there was huge price rises in food and basic products like cooking oil, we saw the Arab Spring. That was in 2011. In countries like Nigeria, where people are very often living on the breadline but have a very, very large population, we need to make sure that we are thinking about not just the migration that is coming out of Ukraine today and making sure we look after people there, but about the implications of food poverty around the world and what that would mean to human migration and human trafficking.
And the dozen farmers I joined on a Zoom call on Monday evening after this show, who were all very concerned that we only produce about 50% of the food in our own country that we eat, and they want to see more support for the British farming industry, would absolutely endorse that sentiment. Can we talk about Ukraine in a different way from this tack? We are united in our admiration for Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Rapturous applause in Canada, US Congress, as he repeated the request, he's not in a position to demand anything. The request is imploring Western governments to help provide a no-fly zone with NATO aircraft over Ukraine. Do you support that or not?
Well, I support his idea of air denial, which is what he wants. He wants to stop Russian planes attacking his people, and he's absolutely right, and we must support
that with surface-to-air missiles.
The question is
to some degree, but.
Sorry, I think we're jumping over each other.
Sorry, Tom, I was just saying we can, to some degree, if it's air denial, we can do that with surface-to-air missiles, which we're already supplying, but that is very different from our pilots shooting down Russian pilots with all the potential subsequent escalation that goes with that.
You're absolutely right, Colin. I'm not in favour of our pilots going in there. First of all, there's several reasons. Let me start off. First of all, Stinger missiles can bring down anything slow or low level, so helicopters or transport aircraft. And the new Starstreak that I hope should be in place in the coming days can bring down literally anything at all, including fast jets. So the two of those should be able to provide full air denial capability. And secondly, the reason I'm not in favour is because I don't think it is in Ukraine's interest for this to become a NATO war. The reason why is because at the moment, Russia is finding it very, very hard to mobilise public opinion in support of this war against their Slavic cousins, against Ukraine. They're finding it very difficult to get people in Russia to be supportive. And you're seeing this in the extraordinary courage of protesters and indeed, as you saw yourself, of a TV news producer who held up a no war sign. If NATO were to be involved, I have a concern that what we would see is a whole of government, a whole of nation response to it from Russia. And I fear that that would make it worse for Ukraine, not better. And there you go, you're showing this extraordinarily courageous producer who's now disappeared, sadly, almost certainly imprisoned by the Russian state. So, you know, I think the most important thing we do is make sure the Ukrainian people win. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that they have the capability to deny air power, but don't give the excuse to Putin to turn this into something that it isn't. This is Putin's aggression and Putin's violence. This is not in any way a justified defence of the Russian people.
One final thought, if we can, Tom Tugendhat, and that's on UK politics. Famously, you are one of those rare political beasts. When asked about the scope of your political ambitions, when asked if you want to be Prime Minister, you say, of course, why wouldn't I want to be Prime Minister? The polls have closed recently. The Conservatives have enjoyed, I mean, forgive me if this sounds frivolous or flippant, but they've enjoyed a sort of Ukraine bounce, and the idea that they can put Partygate behind them and Boris Johnson can bestride the world stage has helped, it seems, his electoral fortunes. I note that Andrew Bridgen, who put one of those letters into the 1922 committee, I think is today going to say he's withdrawn it. The tide seems to be turning for Boris Johnson.
Well, look, I've always wanted Conservative leaders to win. The whole point about being a Conservative politician is to make sure we get the best policies for the United Kingdom. I happen to think they're Conservative. Of course I do, otherwise I wouldn't be standing as a Conservative Member of Parliament. So what we want to see, what we need to see as a country is the kind of policies that transform our country and that get us out of the it's now going to be 3 crises really that have hit us recently, which is COVID and the economic impact of it. And now, of course, the economic impact of this war. And we need real Conservative policies to deliver that change. And that's about, increasing our defence and making sure that our tax policies and our levelling up policies and so on are right. Now, if the Prime Minister can deliver that, fantastic. That's exactly what we need to see. But that doesn't change the answer I always give. And people ask it as though it's a gotcha question. It's not a gotcha question. You've always been ambitious, Colin. You've got a fantastic job, and you've always wanted to have a voice in the national news, and you've got it. And of course, you should be ambitious. I think we should be ambitious for ourselves, for our communities, and for our country. And I think you need to be honest about it too. I've always found it somewhat odd when some politicians say "trust me," but then won't answer the basic question, the first basic question, honestly.
Tom Tugendhat is chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, being as candid as ever. Tom, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
After the break, could pressuring GPs to restart in-person meetings lead to some quitting and an exodus from the profession overall? First, it's time for the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Widespread outbreaks of rain are affecting much of the UK this afternoon, but they will clear from the west and then a touch of frost under clear skies overnight as this ridge of high pressure builds in. But a couple of weather fronts are straddling the UK at the moment. The two across England and Wales are merging together to bring widespread low cloud outbreaks of rain. Eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England seeing that wet weather. Heaviest in the east, but it does clear. And by midnight, most places are clear of that, with those clear skies moving in from the west. And with light winds, temperatures will fall away through the night, frost forming in many places. Temperatures in towns and cities, I think 1 to 2 degrees, but in the countryside, a couple of degrees below freezing. So chilly start to Thursday, but plenty of sunshine first thing across Scotland, England and Wales. Northern Ireland sees cloud arrive early on. That cloud and outbreaks of showery rain move into Scotland. Just about touch parts of Northern England and North Wales as well. A few showers here. The more active weather, I think, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some hail, sleet and snow showers in the far northwest later, along with a brisk breeze. A different picture, though, for the southeast. 14, 15, perhaps even 16 Celsius with widespread sunshine. Into Thursday evening, and the showers in the north tend to fade away, and overnight we'll see clear spells. Not for everyone, there will still be some areas of cloud, particularly for Wales, for western parts of England, as well as for the northwest of Scotland. But where we do see clear skies, temperatures will fall into the low single figures, and again there'll be a touch of frost around first thing Friday. But plenty of sunshine despite the early chill in the air. Some remnants of Wednesday's wet weather and weather fronts still around, and so some cloud there across central parts as well as the far northwest. But otherwise, Friday's looking like a fine day, plenty of sunshine, even more sunshine to come on Saturday and Sunday.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. You can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, here's a question, and I have to say it's one of those questions that pops up a lot in the email inbox. Should GPs be forced to see their patients? Should they be forced to see their patients again, or could pressuring them actually force some of them to say, actually, this isn't worth the candle, it's time to leave the profession? There is a real looming shortage when it comes to general practice. Thousands are, in terms of the average age, ready to quit. It's been described as a profession in crisis. The NHS already short of some 6,000 doctors. And that was before the pandemic began. Let's turn to one NHS GP and a regular contributor here, and that is Dr. Veena Babu. Veena, thanks so much for your time. I mean, I've been doing interviews what feels like years about general practice and it being in crisis. Is it any worse now than it has been in recent years?
You know, I have to be honest, and I can feel the pressure from my colleagues in terms of what we're seeing on the front line and what the profession has become over the pandemic. But I do empathise and understand where patients are coming from as well, because from where they're coming, they just want to see their doctor. They just want to get treated. So it's a really difficult one. I think we need to remind ourselves, when we went to med school and when we qualified, we were not training to see patients on a screen or via message or phone. You know, we were trained to treat patients face to face. This is not something that we train to do or want to do, but the pandemic revealed these opportunities, which allowed us to deliver care quite efficiently in some areas. You know, let's think about you going and sitting outside your GP practice for a fit note or signing a prescription. So that time has been saved. So in some cases, it saved people so much time. It's so convenient. They can do it from their phone. They can do it on the way to work. But of course, when patients need to be seen face to face, they have to be brought in. There's no substitute to face-to-face contact.
And it just feels like it's become an extra layer, Veena, of triaging, a way of weeding out, well, there's a slightly cruel use of the language, but that's effectively what it amounts to, a way of weeding out people who do not need to see you face-to-face.
I could see what you're saying. I would call it more exactly what you said about triaging, right? So what we can do in each clinic, so I see around 18 to 20 patients per clinic, so in a day around 40 patients. Out of those, if there is some that the nurse can see, say if it's just for vaccinations, if it's for child booster immunity, you know, you can kind of allocate those out, and then you're just seeing the ones that need to be seen by a clinician. So yes, it's triaging, but it's also saving everyone time, and you're seeing the most direct person that you need to see for your, you know, given case. But I think it's been so hard to try and mold and change with the demands of the system, with the demands of the pandemic. And now, I have to be honest, you know, as a working GP, whatever you do is not enough. You're never going to appease anyone. The first 5 minutes of a patient sitting there, they want to, you know, they want to offload everything they've been carrying for the last year. So the first 7 minutes, they're just upset and angry, and I have to listen. And then we get to the problem. And because they've not seen a doctor for so long, it's never one problem. It's 7 things, and they're complex things. So I think there's stress at both parties, and it's really difficult. Like I said, if we think of those numbers, 10 minutes per consult, around 40 patients a day, it's really tricky. And I feel the pressures on a day-to-day basis.
And goodness me, the tempo at which some GPs work now, when you see them, they are working really hard. Veena, we've got to leave it there because we're out of time, but thanks so much for yours today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's just gone 5 o'clock. Well, coming up live at 5, David Starkey tells me how we can all learn to stand up for Britain's industrial revolution as cancel culture sets out to demolish its heroes. Also, Tim Stanley will assess whether the crisis in Ukraine has saved Boris Johnson's electoral bacon. And British Airways says, come fly with us. Oh, if you're listening on the radio, you won't notice there's a problem, but there we go. British Airways says, come fly with us, and you don't need to worry about a face mask anymore. Alongside me throughout the next hour, the former MEP, Belinda de Lucy. But first, we have the headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Colin. It's 5:02. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. British Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has landed in Oman after leaving Iran. According to her husband, the first thing that she's asked for is for him to make her a cup of tea when she arrives in Britain later on tonight. The British Iranian aid worker was held for 6 years. Fellow British Iranian Anousheh Ashuri was also released. Nazanin's husband and daughter say they're delighted.
Huge relief that she's on a plane, that she's coming home, that she's free. And thank you to everyone who's been helping along the way. It's been a long journey that people have been keeping us following it on the news, on petitions, with the government. I've said some rough things over the years, but in the end, she's coming home.
Richard Ratcliffe. Speaking in the Commons, Nazanin's local MP, Tulip Siddiq, praised Richard for his tireless efforts to secure his wife's release.
But most importantly, I want to pay tribute to my constituent, Richard Ratcliffe, for his relentless campaigning, but I also think he's really set the bar high for all husbands across the world. Can I say to Nazanin, welcome home after 6 long years. And can I say to Gabriella, this time, Mummy really is coming home.
Tulip Siddiq. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed that the UK has settled an outstanding £400 million debt with Tehran. In a statement to the Commons, Liz Truss said both former detainees will be coming back to Britain.
They are on their way home. They will land in the UK later today, and they will be reunited with their families. Morad Tabaz has also been released from prison on furlough. I know that the whole House and the whole country will rejoice at this news and will share in relief that their horrendous ordeal is over.
The Foreign Secretary. Well, a little bit earlier on, during Prime Minister's questions, Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner urged the Deputy Prime Minister to make sure this situation is never repeated.
So will the Minister commit to a review of these cases to understand what more could have been done by the British Government to secure releases, and whether the lazy comments of the Prime Minister worsened the situation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I can tell the Honourable Lady, having worked for 2 years with the concerted diplomatic effort led by the Prime Minister, that we have done absolutely everything that we can. She shouldn't give succour to the despotic regime that detained our nationals in Iran or around the world by suggesting it's anyone else's responsibility other than theirs.
Dominic Raab there with his response. Ukraine's president has delivered an historic address to the US Congress. Speaking via a video link, Volodymyr Zelenskyy called for further military support and assistance following Russia's invasion. He also urged the US to impose further sanctions against Russia.
Russia has turned the Ukrainian sky into a source of death, and it would be fair if it ended in a day, in 24 hours. That evil would be punished immediately.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The Prime Minister says there's no way Ukraine will join NATO anytime soon. It comes as President Zelenskyy said that NATO has no intention of accepting his country. During a visit to Abu Dhabi, as part of efforts to wean the UK off of Russian oil and gas, Boris Johnson said the UK will continue to support Ukraine.
The decision about the future of Ukraine has got to be
for the Ukrainian people and for Volodymyr Zelenskyy as their elected leader. And the most important thing is that Putin's aggression, his absolutely barbaric attacks on Ukraine, should stop, and they should not be seen to have succeeded.
And the RSPCA has issued a statement saying it has started the process of bringing a prosecution against West Ham defender Kurt Zuma and his brother Johan. They're being investigated over an alleged violation of the Animal Welfare Act. It's after footage emerged of the footballer slapping and kicking his pet cat. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier.
Well, Boris Johnson has been in Saudi Arabia, and I think we just saw him in Dubai, didn't we? Talking about getting more oil and gas for Britain. Last week he was in Eastern Europe talking about defence. It was Winston Churchill who said that for politicians, a crisis should never go to waste. And the tragedy of Ukraine certainly seems to have breathed life into Mr. Johnson's premiership. If you look at the polls today, for instance, the 10-point gap that was opening up between Labour and the Tories has now all but closed up. What looked like an unassailable lead for Keir Starmer has to a great degree evaporated. So has the Russian invasion saved Boris's bacon? Has Partygate been, well, almost forgotten? Or will the laws of political gravity reassert themselves in May come the local elections? Joined by columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Tim Stanley, and here in the studio, the former Brexit MEP, Belinda de Lucy. Tim, we'll start with you because you've written about this in the Telegraph. What's your view?
My view is that the war has certainly transformed the political equation in Westminster. Boris Johnson's relationship with his backbenchers has been healed. The Tory party now stands firmly behind him, and people have not only stopped submitting letters, they're actually retracting letters. My advice, if you write a bad letter, never send it. Sit on it, don't send it. And some of those people probably feel a bit foolish right now. On the other hand, you're bound to get a bounce in a crisis, but there are certain decisions being taken right now which will have a long-term effect upon the British economy. It will make it much harder for Boris to govern in the years to come, bearing in mind that we're only about 2 years away from another election. Decisions that were taken before the crisis, such as the increase in national insurance, which kicks in April, that's going to have an effect upon his popularity. But also, if you're spending so much money, and he's probably going to end up raising defence as well as spending on the NHS. If you're trying to wean yourself off Russian oil and gas at a time when there's already an energy crisis and already an inflationary drive going on, then I suspect that once the crisis is over and politics returns to normal, he's not going to have much fiscal headroom to govern like a populist conservative, which is what he was elected as. So right now, yes, Boris looks Churchillian. But in a few months from now, I think Labour will probably be back on top again.
And Belinda, will he be able to put Partygate fully behind him? It's one thing for the media classes and politicians to suspend their curiosity about Partygate because of what's happening in Ukraine, but it's not gone for good.
I think Boris's opponents to Boris are very keen to keep Partygate on life support machine for as long as possible. It has damaged Boris's image, no doubt. But, you know, he's not called Mr. Teflon for nothing. I think that a huge amount of the electorate, despite being disappointed with Boris over the years in terms of his green policies and a disappointing Brexit deal and high cost of living, will see him as the sort of champion against the worst of the sort of Lib left. And the more the Lib left demonise him and make him out to be a monster, the more he can appear as a sort of flawed hero to voters like myself, for example. I've got a list as long as my arm for reasons I'm disappointed in Boris, but still when it comes to the ballot box, it's very different from polls and often different from local elections. A ballot box, people will be weighing up whether Boris has that kind of charisma and energy and patriotism and excitement about him. Actually, a lot of Tory MPs, lack. I mean, I don't know who would replace Boris, really, that would be as impressive.
I mean, that remains the key question, Tim, doesn't it? If he was to have a stinker in the elections in May, who would wield the knife, but who would then take the crown?
I don't think he would go after May. I think he's probably quite safe until the next election now. For the moment, things can change. No one doubts that he has the charisma. The question is, does he have the policies? I'm not clear in my mind what it is that is different between Labour and Tories on policy. And in fact, because Labour has now shifted, and we haven't discussed Keir Starmer, but that's an important part of this equation, because Labour has shifted back to a triangulation strategy of just offering whatever the Tories are doing, but more of it. We're probably going to approach the next election with Labour claiming to be the party of lower taxes. They are opposed to the national insurance increase, for example. But they'll also pledge a whole load of spending, and the sums won't add up, and maybe the Tories will hit them on that. But nonetheless, there just isn't really an attractive Tory policy package at the moment. Boris Johnson has ridden on the coattails of three major crises: Brexit, COVID, and now Ukraine. What he's never really been tested at is as a peacetime prime minister. The one time when we started to enter that, which was a few months ago, he immediately got bust by Partygate. But that's what he's not really been tested by. What's he like as an administrator in ordinary times? And what does that mean for people's wallet?
Belinda, what about those red wall voters who liked Boris for Brexit, liked him for getting us out of the parliamentary trench warfare that was paralysing Parliament, but really may struggle to forgive him? If we take them at their word and we listen to all those vox pops that we did after Partygate, if they were telling the truth, as I'm sure they were, that they cannot forgive him for what they perceive to be hypocrisy, then those red wall incursions that the Conservatives made will not be repeated.
I think there'll be much more bandwidth for forgiveness if Boris comes out strongly. As Tim mentioned, there's barely any difference between Tory and Labour policy at the moment, and especially on things like illegal immigration across the Channel. Boris may talk the talk, but he certainly doesn't walk the walk on these issues. But if he does take the time during this sort of hopefully peacetime era that beckons in a year or so, maybe, he has a chance to really separate himself, especially on things like the gender ideology, which is really poisoning the Labour Party at the moment. He can come out strongly, against Labour. He can put some offshore processing systems in place. If he comes out not like the liberal Boris we saw as mayor, but more of a conservative Boris, loyal to Tory roots, then he does have a chance. It depends which way he goes, but I don't think there's much hope for a Tory socialist party. The high cost of living is far more damage to Boris than actually Partygate is.
Tim, I wonder if you've been struck, I certainly have been in recent weeks, the last 2-3 weeks, Boris's demeanour at the dispatch box. I don't think of politics as a sort of confidence sport. It's not like cricket where you have a run of bad form and your confidence plummets. But actually, I think I might change my view on that. He's looked totally different at the dispatch box. For a while, he looked absolutely shattered and broken and defeated. And he's got his old swagger back.
He's got it back in part because the Commons is handing it to him. The Commons has developed a degree of respect. It's wartime. They're more likely to defer towards a prime minister in war. At the same time, this is what Boris was sort of made for. It's how he perceives himself as a Churchillian figure, as a man of action, a man of history. And he does have the very rare qualities in politics of being able to command a whole room and for the eyes to be drawn towards him. His authority and his heft doesn't just come from the office, it comes from the man as well. And when you watch the Commons routinely, as I do, 9 out of 10 politicians don't have that, including 9 out of 10 cabinet ministers. You asked earlier who would take over. Right now, I don't know, because no one has the ability to command attention the way he does. And Keir Starmer doesn't have it either. Starmer was hitting him well on Partygate, because that wasn't about charisma. That was about administration and about lies. And on those points, Starmer's qualities of being, frankly, boring actually were a plus. Whereas Boris's kind of roguish charm was a minus. But now we're in a situation of crisis. Yeah, Boris has the personality to pull this off.
Belinda de Lucy, I think wasn't it famously Harold Macmillan who said, what does he fear in politics? Events, dear boy, events. Tim was about to correct me, but maybe you know too. But I mean, look at the last 2 years, Belinda. Look at what's happened to Boris Johnson. I mean, heavens above, even in his personal life. His mother died a few months ago. Nobody noticed. He's had 2 babies born there, nearly died of COVID. I mean, his life it's picaresque. It's extraordinary. Nobody could predict the crises that he's had to deal with. Nobody can predict what's around the corner, Belinda. All you can do, if you are Boris Johnson, is apply yourself when an opportunity arises, and that might look like a threat to everybody else, a crisis.
Yeah, I think it's so true. I mean, when he started office in 2019, he had to hit the ground running. Brexit was in his face, then a global pandemic and newborn babies. And also there are so many enemies trying to bring him down. People have not forgiven him for Brexit on the Tory side as well. But he did give the Tory party the biggest victory since Margaret Thatcher. And I think they need to keep that in mind. The fact that he did unite and appeal to the Red Wall voters, the working men's pubs with Tory MPs reflecting their concerns more than Labour. And he does have a knack of doing it. And his ability to appeal to a wide range of politics, the political spectrum, I don't see it in anyone else. But he has had a hard time. Let's hope the next couple of years, during the more calmer era, we will see, hopefully, some conservative roots of his showing. But it's up to him. It's up to him. If he loses the next election, it will be on him. If he gets disposed, it will be on him. He's had every opportunity to shine and to reflect the voters' concerns. He's chosen not to in the past couple of years. Do we forgive him for that? Well, there's been distractions. Now is the real test, and we'll just see how he performs.
Tim, our tribe, journalists, commentators, we like to think we've got this sort of access into the minds of prime ministers, and people have been writing for months that he was bored of the job, he was skint, he needed to go off to make some money. Nobody knows for sure, but what we can say with conviction, I think, and this is exactly your point, that cometh the hour, he does seem to have been re-energised by the opportunity to be an active participant in the great man theory of history.
Absolutely, yeah. This is his moment, and that's what he did with Brexit, and that's what he did with COVID as well. And a war gives him another opportunity to do that. But you're right. Also, you mentioned Macmillan earlier. Events, dear boy, events. Macmillan was eventually brought down by Profumo. That was beyond his control. But also, it's forgotten by a bout of cancer, which he thought was going to kill him. And in the last minute, he went into remission and found he didn't have to resign at all. It was too late. He'd already said he was going to go. So events do go beyond control. All I would say is that on the political front, if you look at the polling, the Corbyn Brexit era was highly unusual. It was a time during which even Theresa May enjoyed healthy leads over Labour because Labour was so unpopular at that point. If you compare the polls today to 2014, 2015, we're back in Miliband territory. Labour needs things to be better than that because it has such a massive majority to overturn and it can't count on Scotland. Nonetheless, British politics is competitive again and it will return to being very competitive once Ukraine is over.
I'm just trying to pull up our Twitter poll, Tim, Belinda, which tells us that 54% of our respondents, and quite a big response to this poll, I'm not sure we can pull it up at this end, say that Boris Johnson's premiership has been effectively salvaged by the war in Ukraine. I'll just get, we've got about 30 seconds left, just from both of you, in terms of Tories who might displace the Prime Minister, if you had to choose, and it's a difficult choice for Belinda, she's not a Conservative, who would be an adequate replacement for Boris Johnson?
For me, Tom Tugendhat, definitely.
Okay.
For me.
Tim?
Oh, well, I'm slightly partisan. Tom is a friend. I think he'd make a fantastic Prime Minister. However, he still has the problem of having been a Remainer. But then if Priti Patel is forced out of her job, as one suspects she might be, there won't be that many actual levers left in the top jobs. And that's very interesting. We're going to be a Brexit country governed largely by people who campaign for Remain.
But I'd say Tom is a strong patriot, and he comes across as, despite having voted for Remain, the kind of guy that would make the best of Brexit and beat Britain's drum as a Brexit country rather than try and sneak us back into the EU. I don't think that's...
Sneaked another answer in there, Belinda. Naughty you. Tim Stanley, Belinda DeLucy, thanks both very much indeed. After the break, as Volodymyr Zelenskyy gives up NATO ambitions for Ukraine, does he? Yes, that appears to be the case, doesn't it? Are we closer to peace in the East? First, a look at the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Widespread outbreaks of rain are affecting much of the UK this afternoon, but they will clear from the west and then a touch of frost under clear skies overnight as this ridge of high pressure builds in. But a couple of weather fronts are straddling the UK at the moment. The two across England and Wales are merging together to bring widespread low cloud outbreaks of rain eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England seeing that wet weather, heaviest in the east, but it does clear, and by midnight most places are clear of that, with those clear skies moving in from the west, and with light winds, temperatures will fall away through the night, frost forming in many places. Temperatures in towns and cities, I think 1 to 2 degrees, but in the countryside, a couple of degrees below freezing. So chilly start to Thursday, but plenty of sunshine first thing across Scotland, England and Wales. Northern Ireland sees cloud arrive early on. That cloud and outbreaks of showery rain move into Scotland. Just about touch parts of Northern England and North Wales as well. A few showers here. The more active weather, I think, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some hail, sleet and snow showers in the far northwest later, along with a brisk breeze. A different picture, though, for the southeast. 14, 15, perhaps even 16 Celsius with widespread sunshine. Into Thursday evening, and the showers in the north tend to fade away, and overnight we'll see clear spells. Not for everyone, there will still be some areas of cloud, particularly for Wales, for western parts of England, as well as for the northwest of Scotland. But where we do see clear skies, temperatures will fall into the low single figures, and again there'll be a touch of frost around first thing Friday. But plenty of sunshine despite the early chill in the air. Some remnants of Wednesday's wet weather and weather fronts still around, and so some cloud there across central parts as well as the far northwest. But otherwise, Friday's looking like a fine day, plenty of sunshine, even more sunshine to come on Saturday and Sunday.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio, 25 minutes past 5. The Ukrainian president has become a global personality. Today, Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed Congress in Washington, last week our own parliament. And his status matters, not just as a war leader, inspiring his people in time of war, but as a negotiator when it comes, as it must come eventually, to peace negotiations. Yesterday, he said peace talks stood a realistic chance and that Ukraine was willing to give up any aspirations to join NATO. The point is that Were he weaker, less not popular perhaps as a leader, then compromise and negotiations would be harder to pull off. As it is, he can speak for all Ukrainians, even those who don't much fancy the idea of what they might see as running up the white flag. Let's turn to a former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman, who joins us now. Chip Chapman, thanks for your time. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent about Zelenskyy, but I think it's an important one, and we will come on to what's happening on the battlefields of Ukraine in a moment. But I think it's often overlooked sometimes that if, as we eventually have to, or the Ukrainians have to come to some kind of accommodation with a hideous regime that's invaded their country, the person who's doing the negotiation really matters, because obviously Putin, being a demagogue, what he wants he gets. But in a more democratic country, that's not always true.
Well, the first question is the object of war is a better peace, but it's partly from whose perspective and whose rules will apply. Now, of course, I would first look at what the grand strategic objectives of both countries are. And you have to remember what they were for Russia first. And the first one was to regain lost territories and their spheres of influence. I don't think that's gone away from Putin's long-term objective. And the second one, of course, was to re-establish Russia as a great power. And to do that, he needs to divide and weaken NATO and to divide and weaken the EU. None of those he's achieved. Now, some of the methods of doing this out there, you can trace back really to Minsk II in February 15. And the key question has always been, what does the sovereignty of Ukraine look like? And is it sovereignty to be caveated by Russia, i.e. its foreign policy and its internal policy is sort of slightly skewed by what Russia tells it to do? And that was always the problem and will be the problem in going from a ceasefire, which you can have for sort of human security needs, stop people being killed in cities X and Y, to an enduring peace, because there is a difference between conflict termination, stopping the war, and conflict resolution, a long-term process to bring two polities together for peace and love in the future.
And that long-term process requires something else, doesn't it? It requires good faith from both parties. You need to know that as you clap hands and shake on it, that the other guy will stick with it.
Well, it does. And there's another set of realities which confront us here. So, for example, the notion that Ukraine should be neutral. Well, if you look at other models of neutrality of other countries, you could say, well, Switzerland is neutral. Yes, it is. It's still got a strong army and citizen defence force, but it's surrounded by 5 countries which are democratic. The same thing with Sweden. Sweden is neutral. It's surrounded by 3 democratic countries. So neutrality absolutely doesn't seem to me to be the right model when 3 things pertain. Firstly, leaders sometimes change, and Putin will go eventually, but he could be there until 2036. And as long as you've got Putinistas there, you've still got a problem. The second one is that a country's interests rarely change, and I can't see Russia's interests, particularly what it perceives its vital interests being, to change. And the third real key one is that the geography doesn't change. Russia will still border Ukraine unless it takes over Ukraine. And of course, that was what Putin originally said in the pre-invasion, that a steady state Ukraine had never existed. And if you go back then to his July 21 speech, he said, you are not Ukrainians, you are Russians. And all that could be really, really dangerous in the next few weeks if he were to try and escalate to get a better settlement, because you could actually get to a point of genocide in certain areas if all that pertains.
As you say, it's easy to be neutral when the countries surrounding you are nice democracies, but that's not the situation Ukraine finds itself in. Chip Chapman, just a final thought on where we are in terms of the military situation. Has much changed in the last 36 hours?
No, it's not. And I keep saying tactical engagements are thought to support operational objectives to further strategic aims. Has Putin's forces taken any cities? No. Are they governing those cities? No. Have they achieved the capture of Odessa? No. Have they knocked over the political polity and got rid of Zelenskyy? No. They're not really at a good place on the 21st day, the 21 days of infamy, to sort of paraphrase Zelenskyy's phrase to the Congress today.
It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Belinda DeLucy is my friend in the studio today for this hour as well. It's always a problem that when your laptop camera is focused on the sofa behind you, but not you. I'm not sure how you fix that. Somebody have a word with Chip Chapman, tell him to have a fiddle. The good faith question is real, isn't it? I mean, Vladimir Putin has demonstrated to the world you can't take his word seriously. No, of course. And why trust Putin? I mean, he has an agenda. He's had it for some years. It surprised me that the EU decided to depend on Russia so much for gas, because they must have known Putin had his eyes on Ukraine, and it would make it much easier for him to go in and try and occupy it with a puppet government. But I think events have shown that it isn't about NATO. You know, Zelenskyy has come out and said he's not going to join NATO. Have the Russian troops withdrawn? No. So I think the whole situation is don't trust Putin, but don't necessarily trust whoever takes over Putin if he's disposed, because if someone could be much worse than Putin. This is it. We don't know. We always think with good intentions, but we have to think long term to see what are the alternatives to a Putin government. It might not always be the best thing for the world. Yeah, and even some of those who you think of as reformers, actually, if you look at what they stand for, they're often quite nationalistic. Yeah, very much. In Russia. For now, Belinda, thanks very much indeed. After the break, British Airways has announced that passengers will no longer have to wear a mask to fly with them. Nicola Sturgeon, however, has just extended the mask mandate on Scottish transport. Are face coverings now a little more political than they are practical? And will they be consigned to history? First, we'll bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Ray.
It's 5:32. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe says she wants her husband to make her a cup of tea when she gets back to Britain later on today. The British Iranian aid worker has landed in Oman after being held in Iran for 6 years. Fellow British Iranian Anousheh Ashuri was also released. Nazanin's husband and daughter say they're delighted that she's finally coming home. The Prime Minister says there's no way Ukraine will join NATO anytime soon. It comes as President Zelenskyy said he believes NATO has no intention of accepting his country. During a visit to Abu Dhabi, as part of efforts to wean the UK off of Russian oil and gas, Boris Johnson said the UK will continue to support Ukraine. President Biden says the US is committing $1 billion in security assistance for Ukraine, including drones and anti-aircraft systems. It's after Ukraine's president delivered a historic address to the US Congress. Speaking via a video link, Volodymyr Zelenskyy called for further military assistance and support following Russia's invasion. He also urged the United States to impose further sanctions against Russia. And the RSPCA has issued a statement saying it has started the process of bringing a prosecution against West Ham defender Kurt Zuma and his brother Johan under the Animal Welfare Act. It's after footage emerged of the player slapping and kicking his pet cat. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Brazier.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask,
so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Here with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. The government is pushing a bill through Parliament that would require universities and students' unions to protect freedom of speech or face some trouble. It's largely Conservative voices who've been blocked from speaking to students. It's a bit of a generalisation, but I think it's broadly true. Yet now Nazanin Zaghari, the Education Secretary, has promised to launch a crackdown on a group of university academics, mostly on the left, who promote, quote, pro-Putin propaganda. Is this consistent? Is it coherent? Should free speech extend to all within the law, regardless of where that conversation is coming from on the political spectrum? Joining me now, the columnist, author of Academic Freedom in an Age of Conformity, and former university lecturer, Joanna Williams. Joanna, hi to you. I was saying to a guest earlier this week, there were some pictures that we took in here from Australia of a pro-Putin demonstration in Australia. I'm not sure where in Australia, but, you know, scores of people, Putin's great, Russian flags, blah, blah, blah. I find what they were arguing for loathsome and reprehensible. Interesting that it was happening in Australia. I'm not sure it would have happened quite so easily here, but tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not. I'm sure a similar demonstration might or might not happen here. I think the important point is that it should be allowed to happen, particularly on our university campuses. I share your sentiment. I wouldn't agree with such a protest. I wouldn't be going on such a protest myself. But the problem is, if we only ever argue for free speech for people who share our views, then we're not really arguing for free speech at all. And if academic freedom is to mean anything, it has to mean the freedom to be able to tell people what they don't want to hear, to tell people views that they don't like. I actually think there's something incredibly McCarthyite about this idea of a crackdown on pro-Putin lecturers, this idea that academics should be put through a purity test almost, and if they express sufficient pro-Putin sentiment, then they should be cracked down upon by the government. I think it's problematic for so many different reasons. It's hypocritical in the face of trying to get through Parliament a pro-free speech bill. But it also, I think, plays into Putin's hands when we see examples day in, day out of the kind of censorship that's taking place in Russia right now. Well, we end up stooping to their level if we go down this line and start banning pro-Putin views.
Yeah. I mean, and there are existing laws, it seems to me. And I mean, if you've got an academic who is, you know, stirring things up, publishing things online, saying, you know, I endorse what Putin's done in bombing civilian convoys, whatever, then there are existing laws around incitement to this, that and the other that would take care of that. I mean, some people will be uncomfortable. And again, very important to hedge this with, you know, these are loathsome opinions. It's whether they ought to be allowed to be ventilated at all.
Well, absolutely. Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I struggle to see how it would be incitement to even express your support for Putin. I mean, much as we loathe him, and as I say, I certainly join in with this loathing. I think that the whole war in Ukraine is absolutely despicable. I mean, unimaginably horrific act by Putin and by the Russian regime. You know, but people have to be allowed to say that they disagree with me. They have to be allowed to put forward the other side of the argument and say that Putin's right. And like I said, we can hate that view. We can regret that they express that view. We can tell them that they are wrong. but ultimately it is a legitimate view to express. And actually, by banning or cracking down on academics expressing that view, we do ourselves a disservice, because we are then denied the opportunity to be able to argue against that view and to be able to understand where they're coming from, why they think this, and we're denied the opportunity to put them right. And as I was saying earlier, I actually think this plays into the pro-Putin forces. It gives academics who argue this view a kind of air of martyrdom, if you like. It makes it seem as if their views are somehow worthy of being banned, rather than as just arguing against them.
Dismayingly, though, Joanna, I suspect that the Secretary of State for Education feels there's an appetite for this sort of thing, not necessarily apropos Putin necessarily, but this idea that he thinks a lot of people look at what's happening on campus within academia and the cancel culture that a lot of people feel exists there, and feels he's got the wind at his back when he demands this sort of thing. I mean, for what it's worth, I sort of feel that the Secretary of State's got hasn't got a dog in this fight necessarily. You know, there are other ways of correcting this, and he doesn't need to get involved.
Well, this is a very good argument, I think, a very complex argument. Certainly the problems on campus, I think, do go way beyond just slight tinkering around the edges with the law. And I think we need a wholesale kind of cultural shift so that people are really recognising the value of academic freedom and the value of free speech. And interestingly enough, I think the group that's targeted most on campus nowadays isn't actually right-wing academics. It's actually feminists. It's feminists who want to argue that being a woman is a biological reality. Try going onto a university campus and making that statement, that to be a woman means you have a vagina, and you soon realise the limits of free speech, the limits of academic freedom. So I think, you can try changing the law, but ultimately we need to have an acknowledgement that a university should be a place not just with the same rights to free speech as everywhere else, but actually more, because you don't have an education if you don't have free speech. It's only by coming across views that you disagree with that you actually learn, that you hone your own arguments, and that you gain in knowledge. The more we make campuses this place where only particular views are allowed, the more we make students stupid.
Joanna Williams, always good to talk to you. Thanks for your time. Thanks a lot. British Airways has become the world's first major airline to scrap masks on its flights. From Wednesday, face coverings will only be required when a destination has its own restrictions and legal requirements, such as in the United States. Virgin Atlantic plans to follow suit, starting with flights to the Caribbean from Heathrow and Manchester. And Heathrow, it's announced that it no longer requires masks to be worn in its terminals, although it still recommends that travellers do so. The news comes as Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said ministers had decided to scrap all remaining travel rules from 4 a.m. on Friday. Meanwhile, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has U-turned and is keeping masks for at least another fortnight amid a surge in cases. We were talking about that yesterday, weren't we? 1 in 18 people have COVID currently in Scotland versus 1 in 25 in England. We're joined by Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration, which campaigned against vaccine passport measures and much else besides. I'm guessing, Alan, you're pleased that the airlines have taken this step, and it's worth pointing out that the UK is leading the way internationally on this.
Well, I am pleased that it's finally happening at the airport and on some flights. I am concerned that it's still in place in so many places with such scant evidence. As we know, there were admissions in the United Kingdom that masks were actually to make people take things seriously rather than the actual evidence of any efficacy of them. And it really, we should be getting back to normal everywhere fully, entirely. And that's an old normal, not a normal where we're constantly on edge and nervous about seeing one another as vectors. It, should be noted that Scotland has extended measures and continued them with no evidence or foundation. And, whilst someone like President Trudeau, that likes to now declare freedom really being important internationally, has extended all measures in Ottawa, whilst all the other states have stopped it. So you kind of say, yes, it's good. With the travel industry and hospitality and others have been really impacted. In Scotland, The hospitality sector still has to have their staff wearing masks. It's utterly unnecessary and it's very wrong. And we really have got this legacy left. And that's why the public inquiry is going to be very, very important. And we're going to make sure that we'll have an independent one as well, where we get a full reckoning of all these things rather than a repeat of platitudes.
Alan, with apologies, the usual apologies to our listeners on radio, but we were just watching here on TV a lovely glossy video from British Airways, smiling cabin crew. The reality actually on a lot of flights, I think I'm right in saying in America, for instance, the majority of what they call flight disruptions on board planes in the cabin have been set tos, fracas even, because somebody's wearing a mask or somebody isn't wearing a mask and there's been a profound disagreement between the two parties. I mean, if you are running an airline, you'll be very glad to see the back of it, won't you?
I think you'd be very glad to see the back of all the measures. Apart from the billions of masks that now are in the ocean and littering the streets, there was never a substantiated, fully backed, remember, show me the science, we're following the science, evidential foundation for efficacy of general cloth mask wearing. And yet it became a symbol of many things. And some people, after £500 million worth of spending with the Nudge Unit and PSI-B, the Psychological Behavioural Insights team, have been so scared that, understandably, they may perhaps never want to take their mask off. In fact, some people in Britain have argued that we should carry on wearing them to stop things like colds and flus. All of this is really anti-human, and it sort of represents the really problematic wrong way that much of the approach has come about. Now people are recognising and realising that shielding, protecting highly vulnerable groups would have been the right thing to do. Not lockdowns, not blunt impositions, not those terrible restrictions, but a sensible, rational, calm way of dealing with things. And masks were much more symbolic than effective. And the sooner they go everywhere, the better.
As always, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Belinda de Lucy alongside me here with a two penneth to put in on this one. I feel certain. I know you feel strongly about this.
I do, because I've had 4 children go through lockdown and then return to school with masks. Horrific things to muzzle children during learning. And I agree with Alan completely. It's very anti-human. I'm against face coverings of all types unless it directly impacts your health. You know, if you have cystic fibrosis or terrible illnesses, which means colds and coughs can kill you, but only then if masks are proven to work. I think covering your face inhibits socialisation, and with screens interfering with our children's development as enough as it is, and adults, in fact, the mask thing has to go. It's just theatre anyway.
Belinda, let me tell you what didn't happen here. The corporate affairs and the board at British Airways didn't all get round somewhere in West London over a coffee and say, you know what, we're going to strike out. We're going to strike out in a new ideological direction. We're going to ditch the mask. That's not how it works, is it? They've looked at focus groups, they've looked at research, they've looked at surveys and polls of customers, of the punters, and they've decided, I think it's reasonable to assume, that the market wants the choice. We're not saying you can still wear a mask on a plane. Yeah. You don't have to.
No, well, voluntary is fantastic. I can't imagine people dictating to others they can't wear a mask if they want to, but it's their own fear, and the time has finished where people project their own fear onto other people. I'm fed up with panicky, frightened, fragile people projecting all their fear on children, projecting all their fear on the communities. They have no right anymore to force people to wear something where there's very little evidence to show that it protects. And I think it's a long time coming, and it's been great to see how many people have dropped the mask, because there was that big fear that people would be sort of, indoctrinated into thinking they have to wear a mask forever. But actually, most people on the tube now, they've dropped it.
Don't be fed up. Lots of reasons not to be fed up today. Now, what are the things from British history in which we ought to take pride? There is a strong case to be made for the inventions of the Industrial Revolution. Things like the steam engine made possible huge advances in travel and construction and manufacturing. But according to some historians who are decolonising a museum in Wales, the age of steam is guilty of advancing imperialism. They point to the locomotive built by Richard Trevithick. A replica of his locomotive is being relabelled to put it in the context of racism and colonialism, even though Richard Trevithick, one of the giants of the Industrial Revolution, had nothing to do with slavery at all. Earlier today, I talked about this new attack on British history with Dr. David Starkey for a podcast that will be available on YouTube and Spotify later this week. This is part of what Dr. Starkey had to say.
Let's go back to the relationship between slavery and industrialization. It is completely the opposite of what they say. The point is very, very simple. The only reason the British Empire was able to abolish slavery was because we began to make human labour redundant. Slavery is universal in the absence of machines. It's really terribly, terribly simple. And also, if we're going to apply a very, very simple fact, presumably if you say that the steam engine is the vehicle of imperialism or whatever, you do have a little problem of chronology. That is to say that the first steam engines to cross the Atlantic are in the 1830s and the 1840s, when we had already abolished slavery. And the first thing that they were used to do when they were adapted to the Navy was to make sure that not only we abolished slavery, but you stopped the slave trade and stopped everybody else trading in slaves too. So there's a completely antithetical, it's totally the opposite.
Dr. David Starkey there, the full interview, best part of an hour, available in the next day or two on YouTube and on Spotify. Let's turn to another historian, Dr. Zaghari Ratcliffe, who joins me now. Doctor, thanks for your time today, appreciate it. On one level, what David Starkey said there at the end of that clip is so blindingly obvious, but it bears repeating, that actually the Industrial Revolution was the enemy of slavery. It allowed machines, engines, some of them driven by steam initially, to replace the toil of human labour.
Well, I totally agree with David Starkey on this as on many other issues. I think if you look for connections, there are connections between all kinds of global developments. But I think the chronology, as David Starkey pointed out, is that steam engines only came into use really much after the abolition of slavery, and industrialization helped to make it possible to abolish slavery. I think the problem I have with this attempt to link slavery with just about every other economic development is that it focuses only on the transatlantic slave trade. It ignores the fact that slavery was widely practiced across the globe, especially in the Middle East, in Africa and in Arab countries, and that even today you have something which is called modern slavery, which we ignore by focusing on this 200-year-old transatlantic slavery. And interestingly, about 9.5 billion people are in slavery in Africa today, in modern slavery, according to the Global Slavery Index. So I think the whole lopsided priority that this reflects is an attempt to somehow find something to be ashamed of in our own history and culture, and it doesn't really achieve anything. I don't think anyone benefits from it.
Dr. Mazzani, we're going to leave it there because we're almost out of time, but we really appreciate your contribution today, Dr. Zaghari Ratcliffe, joining us to discuss the role of steam engines and decolonisation. Just a final word, which we have time for, with Belinda de Lucy to reflect on this story, which is part of, it seems to me, a continuum of stories suggesting that parts of our history that we've been really proud of that seem to be absolutely uncontaminated with anything remotely controversial, Trevithick's steam engine, for heaven's sake, we ought to be feeling a little bit guilty about.
Yeah, look, these people who want to decolonise our school curriculums and road names and statues, they don't care about slavery. If they cared about slavery, you know, your last guest was quite right. They'd be petitioning against modern slavery, and they're not. And secondly, I don't think anything is ever going to be enough for these people. You know, you can tear down every statue, rip off every road sign, destroy every university and church that was built or had some connection with slavery. It still wouldn't be enough. They hate our country. And why they have so much power, I don't know. They should all be sacked if they come out with ideas that mean our country is being destroyed bit by bit. They're hateful people. Nothing will ever be enough. And I think they need called out as much as possible.
I'm not sure about the sacking bit. That's cancelling. And we're accusing them of cancel culture. You can't cancel just to stop cancelling. But Belinda de Lucy, been great having you here today. Thanks very much indeed. Have a look at our Twitter poll. We've been asking, has the Ukraine the crisis there saved Boris Johnson's bacon? There it is. 54% of you, more than half, say yes, it jolly well has. Do stay with us. More news coming up.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Widespread outbreaks of rain are affecting much of the UK this afternoon, but they will clear from the west and then a touch of frost under clear skies overnight as this ridge of high pressure builds in. But a couple of weather fronts are straddling the UK at the moment. The two across England and Wales are merging together to bring widespread low cloud outbreaks of rain. Eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England seeing that wet weather. Heaviest in the east, but it does clear. And by midnight, most places are clear of that, with those clear skies moving in from the west. And with light winds, temperatures will fall away through the night, frost forming in many places. Temperatures in towns and cities, I think 1 to 2 degrees, but in the countryside, a couple of degrees below freezing.